Dear Dr. Corff, dear guests here in the Staatsbibliothek zu Berlin, dear virtual guests of the streamed lecture. My name is Ursula Flache. I'm Japan Subject Specialist in the East Asia Department. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to tonight's lecture in our series Cross Asia Talks. With the series, we celebrate our triple jubilee. 100 years since the foundation of the East Asia Department, the 400th anniversary of the birth of Christian Menzel, the first curator of our Chinese collection, and 70 years of funding by the German Research Foundation. I'm honored to introduce to you our speaker, Dr. Oliver Corff. A sinologist by training, he was the first person to receive a DAAD scholarship for a research stay in Mongolia in 1991. This was possible due to the then new treaty concerning cultural and academic exchange between the two countries. Dr. Corff has a long-standing interest in computer sciences and languages. Around 1992, he developed a Mongolian language environment for IBM-compatible PCs called Mongolian Language Support. In the middle of the 1990s, he was teaching computer science at the Mongolian Academy of Sciences, with a focus on finite state automata. The practical application for this are finite state transducers for the morphological and grammatical analysis of the Mongolian language. Since the end of the 1990s, Dr. Corff is one of the contributors to develop the Unicode standard for Mongolian and Manju. After his publication of Montext in the year 2002, which is a LaTeX-based text setting system for Mongolian and Manju, he intensified his research concerning Manju. In 2007, Dr. Corff edited the second edition of a dictionary for Manju, the Handwörterbuch der Manju-Sprache, originally written by Erich Hauer. And in 2013, an edition of the classic Manju dictionary, the Pentaglot Dictionary, followed. In the course of his editing work, he published numerous articles concerning lexicology and lexicography of Mongolian and Manju. For his achievements in Mongolian studies, Dr. Corff was presented with the Kublai Khan Gold Medal, the highest award offered by the Mongolian Academy of Sciences in 2015. Since 2022, he serves as Secretary General of the Permanent International Altruistic Conference. Dr. Corff's research in the field of Mongolian and Manju lexicology and lexicography is driven by his conviction that computational methods can make his work as philologist much easier. And the semantic foundation of a lexicon can be expressed and calculated using new quantitative approaches, and he will explain this in more detail now in his lecture with the title Transformative Processes in Manju Lexicology and Lexicography. Dr. Corff, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Mrs. Flache, for this wonderful and kind introduction. I feel very honored, and I feel also very privileged to be here today in the Hartnack Hall of the State Library. And this is indeed a very distinguished opportunity. And so I hope to present to you today some of the findings which were made possible by two marvelous activities of the Staatsbibliothek. One, the centuries of collection work, which brought these wonderful Manju manuscripts and block prints to our today's time. And second, the wonderful work of digitalization, so that these things are available in an online format in the Stabi, so in the digitalisate format of the State Library. This makes it really easy to access all these works, because these dictionaries I'm going to talk about usually are quite hefty volumes with several thousand pages, and it's not a very practical thing to have them on one's desk. It's much easier if you can flip through them on your screen. So, what am I going to talk about today? So, first of all, the Manju Empire or the Qing Empire has made some remarkable achievements in terms of lexicography and lexicology, which are not necessarily known to a wider public, unfortunately. And for the first big dictionary, which is even a big dictionary by today's standards, was the Manju gisun-i buleku bithe, simply a dictionary of Manju words, which was published under Qing in 1708.
May I just adjust this one?
Sure.
Better to be seen.
All right.
So.
Oh, I didn't pay attention to this. I'm sorry, I didn't pay attention to that. So, and this is, you see a picture here on the left side of the screen. This is the very first formal dictionary of Manju, which is up to date, even like to today's standards, it would be a usable dictionary, were it not for the arranging principles I'm going to talk about in a moment. You can see on the left side that the keywords or the entry words are in thick type. So, and then you have a lengthy text which has usually two elements or two components, a definition and at least one usage example of that word. And then through an iteration of several intermediate dictionaries in 1772, another big dictionary appeared, the so-called Nongime Toktobuha buleku bithe. And Nongime means amended or enlarged, and Toktobuha means defined or let's say agreed upon. So this was like a formalized approval of the contents of the dictionary, and this is the Nongime Toktobuha buleku bithe. And buleku bithe is actually just, is just a mirror of words or a mirror in writing. And the idea of a mirror in writing, you find this in the German word Wörterspiegel, is simply a reflection on the lexicon and thus a dictionary. So we should translate it simply as the idiomatic word for dictionary. And to give you a rough idea, the first dictionary of 1708 has over 12,000 genuine distinguished entries. There are a lot more words in there. I'm going to talk about this question later, but it's about 12,000 entries. And the Nongime, so the enlarged and revised dictionary, has over 18,000 entries, which at first glance makes it appear as, oh, it has more than 6,000 entries more than the first dictionary. It's not quite the case, but this will be subject of my paper today and of my talk today. And it also will be the question not only how many words are there which have been added and how do I find them? And that's the huge question. So, basic questions from a reader's point of view are very simple. So if we look these about 64 years, so we know there are new entries, but the questions are how many are there and where in the whole thing were they inserted? And is the difference of entry counts per hachin, and I'm going to explain the word hachin in a moment, a robust measure to tell us where the differences are? Then the next question is, are there any structural changes in the arrangement of the entries? And finally, are there new coinages? Have there been words which have been made up especially for this new dictionary or this new status of language? Because one of the driving forces behind compiling this dictionary was a definition, a public and official definition of a revised lexicon of Manju as a state language. And the question is also, which type of transformation and where do we find the most of these new coinages? And that was from a reader's perspective. If I was an editor, I would have a completely different look at it, because as an editor who sits there and has the task of making the new dictionary out of the old dictionary, the daily routine can be broken down into basically 6 different activities. And that's it. First activity, insert a new word. Second possible activity, delete an old word which you do not longer deem necessary. Third possible activity, rename a word without changing its definition. Like we have the old Manju word "cuan," which means ship or boat, and you will, of course, recognize that this is Chinese. And then there was a new word introduced in the 1772 corpus, which is called jahodai, but the definition of what a ship is remains the same. Then there is the possibility to keep the keyword, but to change the definition. And then another opportunity, you can reposition or relocate the entry without changing it at all. And finally, we have an operation which I call deconvolution. And before I'm going to explain it here, I'll show it to you later, and then you will immediately understand what my intention is to use the word deconvolution. Just to give you an idea, why this is so important and why our tools of approaching dictionaries don't really work in the case of this Manju dictionary. If you have the left hand of the screen, you see an alphabetical order of keywords. I have written this or compiled this in Latin letters. Doing this in Manju letters wouldn't make a big difference because Manju is an alphabetical language and it has its sorting order, and you would certainly find all the GOLs in one area of the dictionary. So this creates a linear order which you can traverse in discrete steps. One step, a new word, one step, a new word. And if you look at these words not as strings of letters, but strings of digits, so every letter could represent a number from 1 to 26 or to 25, then you can immediately understand that sorting a dictionary consisting in a linear order is simply just a sorting challenge in numerical terms. It doesn't really matter whether you have letters or numbers. The sorting process behind it is the same thing. However, these dictionaries are not arranged in a linear order. They are arranged in a semantical order, and there is a non-iterative classification with several levels. So on the top level, we have 36 divisions, like heaven, time, earth, rulers, imperial edicts, music, food, grain, flowers, rare trees, and so on. By the way, these 36 categories or divisions do not match with the 36 volumes. That has nothing to do with each other. And below this top level, we have about 280 in the old and 292 categories in the new dictionary. And finally, some of these, not all of them, are subdivided into comma 1, comma 2, comma 3, so nani nani hachin uju, jai ilachi, and so on, which is just counting in Manju. So if we look at it in a graphical display, I can give you a rough idea here. Let's say we talk about the area of nature, and here I only now pick the animal kingdom, and we will find that the animal kingdom is divided from top to bottom. First birds, then followed by wild animals, then followed by domestic animals and cattle, finally followed by scaled animals, and last by those animals living in or below the ground, which are insects and worms. And if we talk about the birds, we start with bigger birds first, then we have smaller birds, then we discuss body parts of birds, and finally movements of birds. So you have a totally different system of classification with no alphabetical approach at all. So just looking at this type of classification, it's close to impossible to identify by simple bean counting where a new word has been inserted. So this is a mathematical question, actually. So if we have a language with a canonical order of characters, like an alphabet or an abugida, like Tibetan, or a syllabary, as in the case of Japanese, iroha, for example, then this order is also the foundation which governs the lexicological order of entries in a dictionary. So very simple, you have a system which is used for sorting letters, but it's also extended to sort words and everything else in the dictionary. In contrast, those dictionaries we are concerned here today with, they arrange their entries in semantic fields, which then may be subdivided into like things, nomina, actions, verbs, properties, adjectives, and so on. And there is no apparently rule-based or otherwise predictable order of entries. So how to find out the loci and scale of intervention by the editors who compiled the new dictionary? That's the basic challenge I faced myself with, and then I thought how to give a solid answer to this, and a robust answer to this question. Just a small excursion at mathematics. A line, you remember we spoke about linear orders of characters. A line is the theoretical object which is a continuum. It's one-dimensional. And if you take a segment of this line from A to B, then you can subdivide it. And if you split this line in half so that it has a starting point, then it becomes a ray. And a ray starts at A. And in our case, we can, by definition, say it ends at Z, for instance. So that's one possibility. And that's something which is very easily computable. So you have a computational approach which is rock solid, which works, which is reliable. And no matter what kind of computer or programming language you take, you can easily make your computer sort a dictionary of any language which follows a linear order. However, here you can already get the idea that if we do not have an arrangement by letters but by meanings, we somehow move in planes. So it's a two-dimensional approach. And in the case of this dictionary, actually, it's a three-dimensional approach because we have parallel planes, all with their own search spaces. So this is also an idea, what we call search space in computer science. You try to define the area where and the methods where you look for words and how you look for words, and ideally in mathematical terms, because that translates into algorithms which are predictable. And if we now have a look, and now we go back to the gory details. If we now go back to the details, we find that the overall arrangement of 280 hachin or categories was virtually left untouched. So, well, there are 11 new hachits added which are not in the old dictionary. And some of them contain vocabulary which is entirely new. For instance, Faidande Baitalara Jakai Hachin, the category of those objects which are used for protocol display at court. So this is a category which was simply not existent in the old dictionary, but which, of course, for an empire is very important. You must have kind of a catalog of all those things like umbrellas and baldachins and sedan chairs, which you use for the official processions of officials. And then we can also see that, like in the group of objects used for teaching letters, so for teaching literacy, bithe hachin de baitalara jakai hachin, we have 9 entries which existed in the old dictionary, but we have 68 new entries which did not exist in the old dictionary, and so on. I'm not going to go through every detail, but then, for instance, we have a category which is more or less only renamed, like the third from below, Gurgu-i ashara al-bushara hachin, which means movements of animals. However, most of that vocabulary already was present in the old dictionary under the name body parts and related words of animals. And then is the question, if we have these new categories, you can already see some of them contain new words, some of them are just relabeled containers. Are these a refinement of an existing structure, or are these indeed containers for new terminology? Both cases exist, and I'll show you later in the course of the presentation one wonderful example of a new category. And then we can also see that sometimes here the order of hachin has changed. Like in the old dictionary, it's number 42, 3, 4. And in the new dictionary, it becomes 48, 49, and then jumps back to 47. So this because this only occurs twice with no apparent logic behind it, it may well be random. So I'm not going to attach any significance to it because it doesn't prove anything. I can neither verify nor falsify it. So I leave it as it is. And now let's assume the case you have one of those many 280 odd word lists which comprise one hachin, and you are the editor and you are given the task to rework this hachin to make it a part of the new dictionary. Let's assume we have and now we have among these 280 odd hachins, we have some where there are massive interventions and some where you have just a little bit of intervention, but how to find them? So as a human, you would be challenged to read the whole dictionary, or both dictionaries actually, from beginning to end, and only then you'll know. And you cannot, like in an alphabetical order, simply count the entries between letters D and F, just a small section, and it will tell you immediately where the insertions are. You simply can't do that because there is no alphabetical order. So now let's try to follow the process of the editor of this book or of the new edition. What can be observed? So, we had this one before. Sorry. So, we have one ideal case, which I call a perfect correlation. So we have the section on matara and buktara, which means breaking and destroying objects. And we can see on the left hand, we have a list of words which starts with mata, matambi, to bend, matabumbi, to make something bend, and to fold, and so on. And if we have a look at the new word list in the new dictionary, both lists are absolutely identical. So no intervention whatsoever took place here at the level of the lemma. On the left side, I gave a linear enumeration, which identifies the lemma within its own corpus, dito on the right side, and you can see that word number 9688 of the old dictionary corresponds to word number 13,585 on the new, in the later version. So this looks wonderful, doesn't it? So apparently the editor was very satisfied and thought no reworking necessary. Now let's do a graphical approach. I simply make an x-axis, which is the old position, and I make a y-axis, which is the new position. And if there is no change at all, you immediately see a perfectly straight line, and this tells you that this is a wonderful one-to-one relation between place and position in the old dictionary and new dictionary. No changes at all. The question now is, can we quantify this approach to find out what happens if an editing intervention takes place? So, and for this we have a wonderful example. Let's look, for instance, at this list, and you will find out that with the entry 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, Tsalabun and Tsalabumbi, then suddenly the order is disturbed on the right side. So after 8,983, we do not see 84. But this old word, which is the next word, happens to be the word after next word. And again, the same kais, and further down with Ichibun, the same thing. With Gututsun, the same thing, and finally with Efugen, again the same thing. So the order or the relationship between old work and new sorting order is not linear anymore. We have a look at a graphic display, and here you can immediately see, some kind of editing took place. This is a wonderful approach because here you don't have to understand any number. You just see a bent line and you know something happened. So makes it very easy. So if you have your computer generate graphs for every single chapter, you flip through the graphs and you immediately see that's wrong or something happened there. So now we still have to quantify the whole thing so that we can compare different editing interventions of different sections. The formula for that is quite simple. So we have a number of steps. Let x be the number of steps out of linear order, and let n be the number of entries in a given Hachin. And the coefficient of determination, c, can then be calculated as c equals 1 minus x over n. The idea is very simple. Take the first ideal example. We have 0 deviations on 15 steps. Makes it 1 minus 0, because 0 over 15 is still 0, which means 1, a perfect correlation. Take our second example. In 20 words, we have 5 words which are out of sync. 5 over 20 is 1/4. 1 minus 1/4 is 1.75. And we immediately get an idea that the more this coefficient approaches 0, the more obscure the order is. So, and now we can have a second idea, which I call the edit distance. Usually edit distance in computer linguistics has a slightly different meaning, but here it's quite simple. Let's assume we have a position 808 on the left side and 1018 on the right side, and from there we go to the next word. From 808 to 809 is one step, but on the right side it's from 1018 to 1042. This all of a sudden makes 24 steps forward. So now we have to go backwards 23 steps again, and all of a sudden in 18 entries, we make a passage of 142 steps. It's like going to the bakeries and buying bread and returning. You still are at the same place, but you have walked like 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers. So, and this is so to say the walking distance, which was necessary to achieve the final result of this Hachin. And another ratio is possible, a numerical expression, the coinage ratio. Let's assume you have like 20 words, out of which 1 is a new term, or out of which 2 are new terms, and then the coinage ratio can be expressed as a fraction of the number of the new terms t in the lemmata number n in a Hachin. Again, if this is 0, then it's just 0, and if everything would be new words, the whole thing would approach 1. You will certainly think, what is this guy telling us here, and why does he do it? It's very simple. If you tabulate all the Hachin by this coefficient of determination, you all of a sudden immediately get those Hachins in the first place which show the most, let's say, the most degree or the highest degree of editorial intervention. So you immediately get those which are completely reworked. They pop out on the top without the need for human intervention and for flipping through all the whole text, like 2,500 pages or even more, 5,000 pages. You don't have to do it anymore, but you really have access to the text. And I'm going to show an example, for instance, like the Hesse Hachin. So imperial commands has a very low coefficient of determination of about 0.61, and it also has a quite remarkably high coinage ratio of new terms. So out of 18 terms, 7 were redefined, and the edit distance of these 18 words is 142. But we have one which is even bigger, and this is the section on officials, Ambasa Hafasai Hachin, and there the edit distance is 2,770 in just 36 words. Because things were relocated way outside the original Hachin and then jumped back to the original Hachin. So you see an enormous dynamics, and you see enormous considerations of where should we put this word. And you have a number which you can take as a measure of what was the reflection by the editors to define a new position for this word. So, and here you can, you immediately get the idea. So this is the Hesse Hachin, so imperial commands And you see on the bottom line the old position, linear, and on the left-hand scale, the non-Gemäß Toktobuha position, and you see there was some heavy intervention here going on. Now the full picture. If you have a list on the left side with the old dictionary, I just simply wrote 1708 on the left side here, and on the right side you see 1772. Then you can draw lines from the old side to the new side and can observe what has happened, or if anything has happened at all. And here you can see two things. First of all, a number of these entries are relocated into other areas of the new dictionary, so they do not even form part of the Heisei Hachin anymore, but they were reconsidered for good reason. And you see a difference between bold lines and dashed lines. And any dashed line, like here, sh, guvebure hesse, jo, ulchibure hesse, or ce, what is it, abdanga fungnehen, well, you already feel it. It sounds Chinese. And it is Chinese, and dashed lines simply indicate that this word has been renamed while the definition has been kept the same. So you also again get a visual representation of editorial intervention on a totally different level, but it's easy to grasp and easy to work with. And if you deal with a corpus of close to 20,000 words, every tool which makes the word work easier is highly welcome. So, and here, this is a very interesting example. This is the entry for ships, and it tells you very much one thing. Virtually all of it is newly defined. All of the words on the right side, except for the word jahodai, which means ship, did not have any definition or equivalent in the old dictionary whatsoever. So all these types of ships were collected by the terminology specialists, and there are like ships with sails and ships with bores and rudders. And you can also, for those who understand, who know how ships are built in Tibet, you can identify position number 7, wupi, which is just Chinese for wupi, so it's animal hide. So, and it's an animal hide boat. And you see all these different types of boats, none of which existed in the version of 1708. And I think this is a visually striking example that this method helps alleviate the task of the researcher. So now the big mystery, deconvolution. I started talking about deconvolution in the beginning, but I did not explain really what I meant by that. The idea is quite simple. Sometimes in the old dictionary you have very lengthy entries which, if analyzed properly, show to appear or demonstrate that there is more than one definition or even more than one keyword. And indeed, for instance, the pair in-yang is one entry in the old dictionary, and it's split into two entries, the a and the e, so the male and the female principle of the world, or the positive force and the negative force. So this is very interesting. And then you also have on the old dictionary, you have like the 5 phases of things, like the 5 elements, sunja fetan. And in a very lengthy article, every single of these 5 elements, so water, fire, wood, gold, and earth, is described and defined. But this is given up, and in the new dictionary, every single of the 5 elements merits its own entry. So this is new. And even like for the heavenly stems and earthly branches, like the Chiktan and Gargan, which split into 10 and 12, you have the same phenomenon there. So all these definitions, these single entries, were in one huge blob on the old side, and they were broken apart and put into a new order and new systematic in the new dictionary. The text basically remains the same, And here now you see that I do not use a dashed line, but a dotted line. And the dotted line simply indicates that the definition of that word is already present in the old dictionary, but it does not merit its own entry. It's subsumed under a different entry. So, and this is the deconvolution process, which is quite important because this takes place over 1,200 times. And here I give you another example, like you have in teaching, so reading a text, or so reading a sutra is nielembi in Manju. Bithe hulara be nielembi sembi. So reading a sutra or reading a text is called nielembi. However, you have another word, suje boso ijagi chakabe niele kuginsian obume fian tutsi burebe ino nielembi sembi. So if you do something so with like silk and fabric, the sound by tearing it is also called nielembi. And you have a third one, which is jai, means also. Jai simply means two. Second, also another entry, hadoha jekoi jagi chakabe, and so on. This is also called nielembi, and here I added entry numbers. So this is my indication. This is not in the old dictionary, of course. This is my type of indexing, which I introduced. And you see that this one entry, nielembi, in fact contains 3 totally distinct and different entries, which were in the new version relocated into more suitable hachin or categories. So another example here is Tungen, and this is a description of a sorry, I simply forgot what the meaning of this is right now. I apologize. But you have under the entry Tungen, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 different phrases, out of which phrase number 3 is actually a quotation from the Zhongyun bithe. So from the Zhongyun, one of the Chinese classics, a translation of the Chinese classics into Manju, which then serves as an example for the usage of this word. And all of this disappears in the new book, and only the first definition remains. So it makes it much clearer, but also much simpler. And so I now come close to my end of the presentation. And the interesting thing is, if we try to understand the work of the editor without having the assistance of an alphabetical order, then we know that between the top-level structure of the dictionary and the bottom-level structure, which is, the top-level structure is how is everything arranged. The bottom-level structure is what is the definition of each entry. So you open the book, you see a definition, you can immediately check whether it has been reworded or not. But what you do not see is the order of entries within every single hachin. So this is so-called, this is more or less the most elusive part of the whole work, but it's the most critical and most important part. And we identified a number of metrics for identifying and for targeting interesting hachins. I repeat this, it's the coefficient of determination, it's the edit distance, and it's the coinage ratio. So coefficient of determination again describes relationship between old text and new text. Is it linear or is it distorted? Edit distance describes, in the case of distortions, how many steps I had to walk for a given adaptation of an old word. And the coinage ratio finally describes whether I have new words which were made up for this dictionary. And if I just go back one second, in this example here, you see that the coinage ratio of this section is quite high. You have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 18 or 20 entries, out of which at least half of them are redefined. So these are the metrics, and now the idea is, how do I visualize the editorial interventions in a given hachin? and I showed you some examples already. And finally, if we have a closer look, then we find out that not all the Hutchins which appear as new in the new dictionary contain new words. They are either renamed or just, let's say, containers for reshuffled words which have been existing in the old dictionary already. And if we have a closer look at the entries, like the entry on the ships showed it very distinctly, the regrouping of entries, also of entries within a category, was a systematic process. For instance, sometimes in the old entry, in the old group, you had like words which were verbs and nouns all mixed. And if you had a new group which still contains the same words, suddenly they were separated by a type of speech. So is it a noun, is it an adjective, a verb, and so on. And the example of the ships also showed that if we have new vocabulary, it's usually not inserted in a haphazard way, but it's really a whole cluster of new terms which is inserted in a most systematical way. And again, a substantial portion of the new entries in the new word dictionary is not new, but is an entry which already appears in the old dictionary only as a secondary definition. You remember the Sunja Phaeton, so the 5 elements. All of these 5 elements were present in the old dictionary, but they did not merit their own entry. If we describe the whole thing in numbers, then we see that in the old dictionary we have about 12,000 entries, but in these 12,000 entries we have more than 1,200 entries which have secondary definitions, so more than 10% actually. So these are clusters of multiple definitions per entry, so that the true number of new terms introduced in the new dictionaries is not 6,000 plus. You remember, we started with 12,000 versus 18,600. This is not the case. It's only about 5,000 odd new entries. And the editors of the enlarged and revised dictionary successfully managed to improve the order of entries, that's definite, to introduce new vocabulary while leaving the original order virtually untouched, which is a remarkable achievement. And finally, they significantly improved the orthogonality of the corpus. One entry now equals one definition. So it is a much more rigid formalism in the new dictionary than in the old, which makes it also much more usable, at the only sacrifice that the quotations from classical literature are not in there anymore. And so that's what I can tell you today on what is possible to do with these dictionaries. Last explanation from my side, where will this lead to? I'm actually now at a stage where I compare the definitions of each entry between the old and the new dictionary. And whenever this is the same, I take it as one word, one definition. Whenever the definition changes, I highlight where the changes take place, and the whole thing is going to be translated into English. So you will definitely now, for the first time ever, have a full and faithful translation into English of both dictionaries, but combined into one volume. And that's it for today.